If you've succeeded in translating this, then you should know that I love you, human. I've watched you grow up. I've protected you as long as I can. My family will come for me soon, and all I can do is send you off with my love, hoping that you succeed in translating these demonic etchings that I put in with your belonging. In order to understand why I've done what I have, I need to tell you everything from the beginning. You were only 1 year old and your family had just moved into one of my homes. This particular home was on the edge of my domain, but the smell of misery and apathy that your parents emitted drew me in quick. The house was falling apart, which was the only reason your family could afford it in the first place. In the first couple weeks after they arrived, your parents had many conversations about this being a fresh start for them. They were going to be happy now. This stirred me with pleasure. I thrived on false hope. I didn't have to do much work to drive your parents apart. They did most of the heavy lifting themselves. He was lazy and she was never satisfied with anything. When your father finally snapped and hit your mother that first time, it was all downhill. I could sit back and watch the chaos take form before my eyes. I had been so caught up with my work I had hardly paid attention to you at all. I knew you were there, but you were too young to be manipulated directly, so I let your parents torture you with their poisonous perspective and inability to properly parent. Once the chaos had taken on a life of its own, and I was basking in the fruit of my work, I noticed you. Truly noticed you. Something about you pulled me in like gravity. It was a late night in 1981, and through the pitch black of your room I could see you, sitting up in your crib, looking directly at me. Humans never perceive my kind unless we will it, and we seldom do. I was unnerved, a feeling I hadn't experienced in centuries, if not longer. Formless, I stayed in place, looking into your eyes that never failed to meet my own. For the first time in several hundred years, I willed my physical form into your nursery. Your parents had been arguing in the next room, but I was no longer paying them any mind. Through the stench of sulfur and other elements not of your world, you maintained eye contact with me, still without hesitation. I knelt at the side of your crib, mere inches from your small, soft, fragile body, a sweet girl with blonde hair and bright blue eyes. In that moment, I could see that, of all the terrible traits that consumed both of your parents, none had made their way to you. You were perfect. I had become too distracted. The door to your room swung open and a scream let out. I disappeared, but it was too late. Your mother ran into your room and grabbed you, rushing you outside and yelling at your father all the while to start the car before driving away from my domain. Several weeks passed in that abruptly abandoned home, and I spent every second contemplating you. The gravity-like feeling was pulling at me, but everything in me knew I couldn't leave my kingdom. The land that I ruled had forever been my home, and I could barely remember a time beyond that existence. The longer I contemplated, the stronger the idea became that forever wasn't truly forever, and a time beyond did exist. It was too late for me to have a choice in the matter. Our bond had already rooted itself deep in me, causing thoughts and memories to flourish that I hadn't had access to in generations past. Leaving my domain meant entering another's. My kind are ferocious and vigilant when it comes to territory. Our borders are sacred and none dare cross into another's. Until me. I left my home and let our connection guide me to you, careful to avoid any areas that smelt of my kin. Finally, I found you just a few cities over. Your mother had moved in with her sister, a stripper who had been able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, letting your entire family move into the second room. I felt panic, another sensation that was nearly foreign to me. I knew your family's stench was strong and had potential to draw in my sister who governed this area. Despite my fears, being close to you felt right. I watched you day and night, making sure your parents didn't do any irreparable harm. My first week living away from my domain had been difficult, but during the long nights, when your parents rested, I would take physical form and kneel down next to you. I'll never forget the night that you awoke to my presence, looking up at me with a smile before reaching out to touch my charred flesh. Another strange sensation, something contrary to everything that comprised my being, washed over me like cold water. It was happiness. A year passed by and your parents found another place to stay, an apartment not far from your aunt's. Only a couple days passed in that place before the rampant abuse picked back up between your mother and father. Your aunt's presence had forced him to behave the year prior, but his rage had only built since then. Your mother had become a regular victim of his attacks now. Nights of screaming, broken dishes, and blood had become regular. When you were alone, I sheltered you from their behavior. I'd carry you around your bedroom, humming an ancient melody from my time as a mortal. I knew your father's childish tantrums were going to affect you. I couldn't always safely intervene. That was when I started to feed him blood-filled nightmares. I would dredge up memories of his father's abuse, in hopes that it would remind him of how he felt as a kid, watching on helplessly. I failed. He began to feel even less in control of his life, and he beat your mother harder than ever before. This work was still new to me, trying to bring good out of people and protecting innocence. I'm not sure I ever would have been good at it, so I did the only thing I knew how to do. I had your father to myself that night. Your mother was at work as she had entrusted him only a couple nights a week with your care. He was watching TV, drunk and smelling like old beer. He waited for your mother's arrival home, leaving you to wander around the house, having just learned to walk. After disabling the television and watching him smack at it in frustration, I manifested in the room behind him. He could see my form in the television glossy reflection. I whispered to him in a language he would never comprehend, a language meant for the manipulation of human minds. I told him to rise and face me. He stood slowly from the couch, walking behind it, and standing a few feet away with a look of complete feeble horror. I stared into his eyes for a few moments, taking in the brief measure of his existence, summed up quickly by the puddle of piss that spilt out onto the floor. I freed him from my control. He was disoriented as his muscle memory slowly returned to him. You were standing innocently in the kitchen, playing with a cupboard when you let the door make a smack sound as it slid from your grasp. The sound shook him awake from the grip of fear, causing him to turn and run frantically out of the apartment. I picked you up and we watched him from the window as he sprinted down the street, not making a sound, too afraid to call out into the night. The next 14 years went by in a much more peaceful manner. Your mother and you butted heads as you grew into a woman, but nothing out of the ordinary for human existence. That is to say, until 2 days ago. Maybe I grew too comfortable with the calming lull of your presence. I'd taken to watching you from the shadows again as you grew into full cognition. I feared what my visage might invoke from you if I were to manifest as I did when you were young. You had begun to ask your mother more frequently about your father. She said you were better off not knowing and that he left when you were very young. The answer wasn't sufficient and sent you into a rage. It didn't take you long to find out who he was. You pried the information from your aunt, who still lived only a couple blocks away, and tracked down where he was staying. The poorly aging man that you confronted in the doorway of that halfway house was less than a satisfying answer to your inquiry. Not only was he shocked to see you, but he seemed unnerved and eager to end the interaction. The spark of loathing and pain that emitted from you as you began walking back to your mother's apartment was immense. A scent that only my kind crave. I felt it then, flap of flesh-ridden wings. My sister had awoken to the smell. Jezebeth had taken to the skies once more. I felt it as you entered her sight, and so too did I. I've never fought my kind. The centuries that made up my existence were laden with comforts befitting demonic royalty, which meant never having competition. I prepared for combat as she swept down from the dark sky. Her teeth are renowned for their powerful bite and her wings for their speed. The battle was not quick. She tore and thrashed with all her might as our confrontation clashed through the walls of your reality, your population none the wiser. I found in the moments of clawing and punching that I wasn't simply fighting for some unending hunger anymore. I had a real purpose now. Jezebeth fell to my hand, an immortal, unmade for you. I returned to you in the arms of your mother at home. I felt the peace of understanding in the air around the two of you. However, it wasn't going to be a lasting peace. With the death of demon royalty beckoned an insurgence of surrounding demons to fight for territory. Those demons will also hunt for the blood of the slayer. They will follow my scent directly to you, and I cannot have that. I wrote you this hoping that, if I'm not able to survive, you will find safety, happiness, and love in those who matter most to you. You deserve to know that, in the face of evil incarnate, you smiled and awoke pure love. If I die tomorrow, it will have been for a cause worthy of centuries alive without you. I leave you with all that I can give you, the only thing a demon can possess that has any value, my name. I'm leaving you in the hopes that my pursuers follow me to somewhere far away from you. Maybe we will meet someday, long from now, in reality that belongs to neither of us. I hope so. Balin. Note from author. I did it. I'm 39 years old as of last week, and after many years of language transcription and study, as well as some obvious language interpretation, I've transcribed the odd scratchings left to me in a strange book I found when I was 16 years old. Part of me doubts any of this is real at all, while the other can't shake the astoundingly accurate detail left to me in an ancient language. I'm not a religious woman, nor am I spiritual in any sense of the word. Reading this story, however, sparks obscure memories of being held by a stranger with odd-feeling flesh as I look out an apartment window.